Hello, welcome. My name is Jason Henderson. I am the co-publisher at Castle Bridge Media with Insure Yo. Tonight, we are having our launch party for the latest volume of the Castle of Horror Anthology. This is volume 7, and it's called Love Gone Wrong. And I think once upon a time, when we bandied about, on the big whiteboard, what's the next collection going to be, I think we were thinking, we could do this for Valentine's Day, but then we decided, first of all, Valentine's Day was the following week. So it was like, let's still do love, because love is a universal theme and April is the cruelest month. So here we are. I am also letting people in from the waiting room. And what I'm going to do, for those of you who have been to Castle Bridge Media launch parties before, this is something that Insure and I have felt is just deeply, deeply important in the launch of the anthologies, is getting to hear from each of the authors as far as what they were thinking, what they were trying to accomplish. And that gets really fun, because as we change the assignments each time, people will sometimes stretch into the kinds of stuff that you didn't necessarily expect from them. So a good example is my good friend PJ Hoover, who's here. I know her for her amazing adventure stories, but she writes such vicious horror stories, and it's been really fun to see that. So for those of you who, as Julia mentioned, Insure Yo, co-publisher, intended to be here tonight. He has some family issues to take care of, but he did, of course, create this amazing cover, among other things, and was editor on the book, and did the amazing introduction. So he's sorely missed. And for those of you who don't know, Insure Yo and I grew up together. He's created all of those, like down here. I don't yet have a copy of Love Gone Wrong, but he did create you can't see it, the Women Running from Houses collection and everything else. He's always created, oh yeah, there it is. Alethea has a copy. Yes, and he is just an amazing guy. And we met in the 5th grade because Insure and I made a movie together about a pair of, they're roommates, and one of them is a vampire. And that was I had written a script, and I was like, "You want to make a movie with me?" And he was like, "Sure." And so we became friends, and here we are, something like, many decades later. I actually have no idea how long ago that was. It was a long time ago. It was the Reagan administration, I'll say that. So, all right. So what I'm going to do is run down the line and let each of the authors introduce themselves. And so we'll go around the horn talking about the stories that people came up with. And I'd like you to say what your story is called and what your themes were. And if you want to talk about any challenges you had, great. And then after that, we're going to open it up to questions, if anybody has questions, or we will just, I'll ask you questions just about the process. So going in order, Alethea, Kontis, hello. Welcome back. Your story is called The Witch of Black Mountain. And so I sent out the call, said it's called Love Gone Wrong, and that could mean almost anything. You tell me what you want to do. And so you came up with The Witch of Black Mountain. So what is that about?
Okay, well, first off, I have to introduce myself, right?
Yes.
I am Alethea Kontis. I am a storm chaser and a K-drama fan. And I'm sure there are some other things in there, but I can't remember because it's 2020 something and I don't have a brain anymore.
Yes.
So that's my introduction. Woohoo!
Oh, good. That was excellent.
Thank you very much. Yeah, storm chasing is coming up real soon, and that's pretty much all I can think about. Witch of Black Mountain is one of my favorite stories. It's so great. And of course I did, as I'm sure you can tell, write it in the wake of a terrible, terrible breakup. But in doing so, I found this magical world that I invented with coal mining fairies that I did not expect would come out of my world building brain. But sometimes when you're in the throes of lots of emotions, magical things come out. So there are several ways that you can die in coal mining. There are white damps and black damps, and there are like 5 different damps. One of them kills canaries because it's methane gas. And I decided that those were all fairies. So my Witch of Black Mountain is actually fae, and they have a reason for, killing people. So yeah, I also realized when I was going back over this story that this is one of 3 stories now that I have written about magical mountains. And I didn't realize that was going to be a theme in my writing, but here we are. And yeah, one of them is the Glass Mountain. And then the other one is the Dust Wish, which is based on a mountain in like Albania. So yeah, but yeah, Witch of Black Mountain got a little dark. Well, sometimes I can get a little dark. I like getting a little dark.
I enjoyed that a lot, and I really liked. I'm going to ask you guys later about these settings, about choosing your settings, because our next writer, PJ Hoover, actually has a very similar setting to the Witch of Black Mountain, which PJ, or I guess I'll call you Trisha. So Blackheart, so Alethea's Witch of Black Mountain involves this girl going into up this mountain into this very, very deep rural setting, and you have something very similar, and yours starts with a girl looking for graves. So your story is called Blackheart, but go ahead and introduce yourself and then tell us about how you came to the story.
Okay, so I'm PJ Hoover, and first of all, I just want to say it's amazing you have 7 anthologies out so far. That is like something to be really congratulated. Like, look at that. That's amazing. So
thank you.
Way to go. Yay.
That's very kind. Thank you for editing. That was
yeah, that was fun. And thank you for letting me be a part of them. And so, yes, I'm an author here in Austin, Texas, former engineer. Mostly I write kids' books, yeah, but you know what? There's just something great about being able to go into the deepest part of yourself and pull out like a horror story. Yeah, and so Alethea, that's really funny that you're also have a coal mining story, because so my grandparents came over from Poland. They came through Ellis Island, and they moved to Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania, to coal mining country. And my grandfather was a coal miner, and in that area, in the mountains and stuff like that. Like, the thing I love is that you have all these diverse cultures, and you have all these stories of lore and stuff like that. And I remember from a very early age when we would go visit my grandparents up in Pennsylvania at the my father's boyhood home, just sitting around by the wood stove, and my relatives telling stories, about all the different things. You don't know what you can believe, you don't know what you can't believe. And so one of the stories that always stuck with me was this one about this woman who hit her husband over the head with a frying pan and killed him.
What, just somebody they knew, or like just like
someone like down the street, just got a little upset with her head. Maybe he just drank too much, stepped out. I don't know what happened, but you know what? It's just one of those stories you're like, that's perfect, and so I wanted to capture. I've loved going to Pennsylvania. I love the whole ATV aspect of it, and going up in the mountains and the woods, and just like losing yourself in nature. And so that was really what I was trying to capture with Blackheart. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you. It's dark. It's a dark story, and it does include a frying pan used in one of the ways that frying pans are not intended to be used. Well, I guess that all depends. All right. I don't know if we have Teel James Glenn as one of the people that is covered up. I don't think Teel's with us. So if so, speak up. But if not, Jeremiah, there you are. Jeremiah Dylan Cook. This is a crazy story. So we start out with these two very rural stories, and then we get to yours, which is town, suburb, but about a woman going through a messy divorce, and it's wild. And so introduce yourself and tell us about this wonderful title, 7 Entries in the Midnight Path.
So I'm Jeremiah Dylan Cook, horror writer. My work has appeared on the No Sleep podcast, in other installments of Castle of Horror. Most recently, I had an academic essay about H.P. Lovecraft published, which I'm pretty proud of because it's a lot of work to get an academic essay published.
Yeah.
So the story, Seven Entries in the Midnight Path, was directly inspired by reading Paul Tremblay's Notes for the Barn in the Wild from his collection Growing Things, which I happen to have right here with me. I'm not repping him, but I have met him twice and he's very nice. So each of his stories in that collection plays with form, the form of how the story is presented. So when I wrote Seven Entries, I really wanted to do that. So it's told in a series of journal entries. Both stories, Tremblay's and mine, have unreliable narrators and are packed with a bunch of horror references. I really liked in Notes for the Barn, there's this moment in Tremblay's story where the protagonist realizes that essentially something weird is happening with his journal, and there's entries that he didn't write in it. So I really wanted to do something like that in my story. So my story, as Jason said, focuses on a divorce, and specifically a divorced woman, and she's instructed to do journal entries every day for 7 days by her therapist. But things get really weird when she finds a book called The Midnight Path, written by an occultist, and she uses it to create a board game because I really wanted to do a story about something, the book that drives you crazy. So like the Necronomicon, when you read it, you're driven mad. But I wanted to put a twist on it. So instead of reading a book and going mad, in this case, people in the story may or may not play a board game that drives them mad. I'm also like a board game nut, so I was tapping into that energy. And then I initially wrote the story in November of 2019, and I sent it off to my friend Eric, who I have to shout out because he gave me a little feedback on it. And then I put it through the submission grind, and it got rejected a bunch. But some stories you get rejected a couple times, and you're like, okay, I'm going to shelve this for a while. But Seven Entries, I never gave up on it, and I just kept kind of grinding away, and it finally got accepted here. So pretty excited about that. And then I have to talk about a couple of the Easter eggs, and I'll let everybody else go. Sorry, I feel like I'm hogging the floor a little bit.
No.
Everybody else was fast, so I'm going a little long here. So Easter eggs in the story. First, basically every last name in the story references something horror related. There's Dr. Keist, who represents Gwendolyn Keist, the horror writer. There's the character Lisa Barron, who references Laird Barron, the horror writer. And Jean Tremblay, who's a character in the story, represents obviously Paul Tremblay. And then there's other characters that reference H.P. Lovecraft stories. And then the last little Easter eggs I had to touch on, and this is kind of funny because Pennsylvania coal mining got brought up, but I'm from Hazleton, Pennsylvania, which is a big coal mining town. Actually had the largest deposit of anthracite coal on the Western Hemisphere under it. And basically all my ancestors are coal miners. And one of my Easter eggs in my story is that the town of the story is called Hazel Peak, which is a play on Hazleton. And there are two other little local Easter eggs. One is Cupboard Books is mentioned in the story, and that's a stand-in for Cupboard Maker Books, which is a great bookstore in Enola, PA. If you ever make it out this way, they foster kittens. It's a used bookstore. It's awesome. And the last one is the board game coffee house in my story. It's based on the Board Game Cafe, which is in my area, or was in my area. It just closed, sadly. But I met a lot of friends there, and it's just a great place. So I had to immortalize it in a story about horrible things happening at that board game coffee house. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but so that's pretty much all I had on the on the story. So.
I love that, and I caught about a third of those references. We have a board game. If you ever come to Denver, we have a board game coffee house like here that you will totally dig because they got board games and they got comic books, and it's pretty groovy. It's called Enchanted Grounds, which because every coffee house has to have a pun in the title.
I would love it.
That's wonderful, and it's funny when we come back around. I might want to ask you about form because it strikes me that whole story could have been told. Each of your stories could, in theory, be told in the form of letters. And your story, it's in the form of letters. In theory, could have been told linearly, but it would have lost some of the mystery of what the heck was going on. Will McDermott, are you? Yeah, there you are. Okay. Will McDermott, this is a totally, your story is so different from Jeremiah's that it's really remarkable, because his is an epistolary story that heavily references Lovecraft. Yours is a straight third person narrative that feels very contemporary horror, even thriller. And I wish you would write a screenplay from this, because I think it's really strong. So it's called Choices, and go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about it.
Sure. My name is Will McDermott. I'm a fantasy, science fiction, and now more horror writer. I've been writing mostly tie-in media fiction, a lot of it in the game industry. I've written for Magic the Gathering and Black Library, which is the Warhammer 40K imprint, and recently have gotten the chance to write a few times in the Kolchak, the Night Stalker milieu, which is great fun, and I love writing in first person. It is just, I love the scenery chewing aspect of the first person noir. Is so much fun. This story I actually wrote about 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, for another anthology, which the anthology editor loved it, but it was too far out from the other stories that she couldn't accept it. And so it's kind of bounced around. I've revised it a number of times. But I wrote it as, if you've read it, you'll probably be able to tell, I wrote it in the aftermath of 9/11. And at the time, I was developing a series of short stories, which I've only gotten a couple written on, and about 20,000 words in a novel that's in the same series, of ordinary people get odd superpowers and then have to deal with them. And the anthology that I was going to write of these stories was going to be called Choices, and this was going to be the first story. And it's just the story of a fireman in New York City who has a superpower where he can change a decision that he has made in the past, and that changes what happps. So
it's a wonderful concept. I love that.
Go left instead of right. If going left led to a worse part of the fire or led to someone dying, he could go back and go right, and everything can work out. And of course, as the story progresses, you realize that everything doesn't always work out, and he has to deal with the repercussions of his choices in the end.
It's so funny because it almost plays like a superpower without costumes in a way. And
Right.
because we're now so we're not divorced, we're so distant from 9/11 that 9/11 is not what popped into my head. I mean,
Right.
so that's, by luckily waiting 20 years to publish the story, it feels more like just a contemporary thriller, because the disasters are more neighborhood sized. It's plane crashes, it's hotel fires.
Right.
That's really cool. Thank you very much. And continuing, so yours was about that was about obsession with fixing this relationship and making choices,
Right.
but also being a fireman. So what's funny is all of these are around this concept of love. So there's always a love relationship in the center of it. So Lewis Westbrook, your story, which comes right after Will's, is as different from that as his was from the previous one. And I mean, it's grotesque. I would love for you to explain yourself. And I love it. I really love it. And but man, is it rough. So please introduce yourself and tell us about A Love All Consuming.
Yeah. Well, first off, my name is Figun Westbrook. I am pretty new to the writer world. I've been writing for a long time, but it wasn't until the beginning of this year, just the end of last year, that I decided to actually ever try to submit my pieces anywhere. And so it was kind of just a little bit of good timing that I saw the call for this. And one of my partners is really into cannibalism and immediately was like, you have to write a cannibalism piece. And even if it doesn't get anything, it'll be for me. And I go, I guess. And I had just been getting into writing horror like the month beforehand. So I had no idea what I was doing and just spent like a whole day trying to get anything down. And then I was like, oh, I can just be like hella gross.
Yeah.
Somehow that kickstarted it. And I was able to actually do it. As Jason was saying, it is a very grotesque piece. This is also like the most spicy piece I've ever written, which is very funny to have side to side. Because I had some people's reaction be like, it made me uncomfortable because you wrote it too hot and then it got really gross. And I was like,
Yeah.
I didn't realize I had that power. But it was a really fun piece to explore. It's definitely on the shorter side because I was still kind of figuring out what I was doing. And yeah, the main inspiration was that one of my partners really wanted me to write a cannibalism piece, and that like he's in love with Hannibal Lecter. And so I wrote it for him and tried to be as grotesque as possible to give it that kind of vibe. And I really loved exploring having some of the like earlier notes about the food and how they were eating, then kind of have little callbacks in when they were eating each other.
Mm-hmm. The date earlier, I just have to say the date is very sweet, that like, so it has this wonderfully romantic, just extremely romantic feel. And then it turns into this hardcore cannibalism story that is just unbelievable. So that was really cool. Thank you. And if we get the chance later, I think you raised a very interesting issue about how exactly is a short story structured, because there's as many answers as there are writers, and some of you are writing short stories that are essentially teeny tiny novels, and others are writing short stories that are really like vignettes, like 3 scenes, and so I'd love to talk about that stuff more. The more I know about this, the less I feel I know about this, and I feel like it's always a renewing question. So thank you, Liz. Frazer, I don't think that we have. Do we have Liz? Basically, anybody in the UK, it's tough. I mean, it's because it's like 7 hours later there, and they're like, I don't know if I want to get on a Zoom party and talk about cannibalism. So, we'll just. All right. Do we have Tom? I don't see Tom. All right, Scott. I know I saw Scott. There you are, my friend. Hello. All right. Yours is called The Loneliness of Monsters. This was a story every bit as sad, and I thought very well thought, as Lewis's was gross. So tell me, go ahead and introduce yourself, and talk to me about this story, and if there were any influences to it, because it reminded me of something, but I don't know what. So go ahead.
I'm Scott Pearson. I'm a full-time freelance writer and editor. This is my 3rd volume of Castle of Horror that I'm in. I've been having a lot of fun contributing to these. I would have thought of myself primarily as a science fiction writer before this, but I've been having lots of fun stretching other muscles here. So The Loneliness of Monsters came from last year. A writing friend of mine, William Leisner, and I self-published a book that contained a novella by each of us set in a shared world, set in the 1940s in LA, and mysterious monsters are increasingly seem to be appearing in the City of Angels. It's a very noirish book. My story in it, The Big Dark, is about a private detective, and of course it's in the first person. It's very noirish. And we were developing this idea of a series of novellas that we would write set in this world as the monster influence grows and grows through the decades. And so we're currently working on a couple of novellas set in the 1950s. But somewhere in the middle of that, I came up with the idea for a short story that was set in the same world. And I didn't know what I was going to do with it because we were just planning on doing novellas. And then when I saw the open call for this with the theme Love Gone Wrong, that was just like a lightning strike, because I was like, oh my gosh, that's what this story is. There's all these layers of love gone wrong. I mean, there's sort of the primary story, but then there's just all the relationships in the lead character's life, her relationship with her husband, her relationship with her sister, her relationship with her brother. You know, families can be difficult. So in all sorts of little ways, maybe there's love going wrong there. But then there's a very strange and disturbing love gone wrong that goes on with the lead character. And
I've never seen anything like that. It feels almost like an X-Files kind of character. I mean, it's a very strange, but it's not handled like, you know, it's the FBI or whatever. So it has a very personal feel to it. But it's a very unusual. If we want to call it a monster, it's a very unusual monster.
yes,
that was cool. Yeah.
And it's also, I've been writing a lot of nostalgic pieces lately. So not even, you know, this one is set in the 50s, and I've had some other stories published recently that have been set in the 50s. And I really like doing period pieces like that. And then with this story, it's set in my hometown, the small town in northern Minnesota that I come from. And so, and this is the second story I've done recently that I've set, it's in my hometown. And so that kind of fits into the nostalgia as well. I'm just really enjoying writing these small town characters that have very bizarre things happen to them.
One thing that I want to circle around to, hopefully, is I wonder why we're so drawn to small towns. Because I think if you did a chart, most of the people in the 12 stories that we have, most of them are set in small towns. And I don't know why that is. I would love for somebody to take a guess at that. Thank you, Scott. Stephen, I see a Steve there. Is that Stephen Jones? Maybe not. Okay, so if we don't have Steve Jones.
No, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Yes, hello. Okay, I was pointing at the wrong Steve. I'm sorry. Which you can't tell because we're on Zoom. And
Right.
but okay. Yours is not in a small town. So if this were Creep Show, we have yours, which is in an utterly different setting, which is kind of I don't know if it's a high tone suburb or a university, but it's a nice setting. And this one actually did remind me of like a Creep Show episode. So your story was called Expiration Date, and it's again, when you lay these out in order, you try to make them such that if one of them is sad, the next one will be a little more snarky. And so yours is very different from the last one. So tell us about Expiration Date and introduce yourself first.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm Steve Jones. I write under Stephen Philip Jones because Steve Jones is a common name. I'd like to stand out a little bit on the shelves, hopefully, if I ever get on them. I've written comics, novels. I've had a couple of audio scripts produced, like through Imagination Theater out of Seattle. I've done some nonfiction as well. I'll write anything if I think I can get it published, but my joy is fiction. I like the Creep Show reference because one, I love the movie, and two, this was actually written as a tribute to the Amicus films that came out in the 70s.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I'm old enough where I went to the theater and saw them as a kid, preteen as a teen. So I got my mind warped on Dr. Terror's House of Horrors and Torture Garden and all these. And this was meant to be like a tribute to that.
Wow.
But when you're going to do an Amicus stories, you got to decide, well, what am I going to write about? Am I going to write about, we think they're vampires, but they're really werewolves. We're going to do a monkey paw kind of story. I'll do a somebody did somebody wrong story. That. I'm not sure how much to say. I don't want to give too much away.
I can tell by the way, it's so, see, the funny thing is that came through. If you had in your head, Torture Garden and Dr. Terror's House of Horrors and Tales from the Crypt, it feels like it. I mean, right down to there's a jealous husband and there's a lawyer and there's and there's there's artifacts that might be up to no good, and just, you know, it speaks that vocabulary very effectively.
Yeah, and you have that little, I don't know if you want to call it, oh, Henry or ending, or oh my God, Henry ending. You know,
Yeah.
twist at the end, you got to get where, oh, that didn't end well for him, did it? You know, so
Yeah, and I don't think that's much of a spoiler, because
no,
those
you see it
those,
coming. Yeah,
those stories never end well.
No.
I mean, so that's really cool. I'm so happy to hear you say that, because that it's just so funny, because when you think of like the sort of spookiness of Alethea's story, or the romance and then grisliness of Lewis's, and then yours is like a wonderful callback to the 60s, and that's groovy to me. Without it being, it's not an overly groovy 60s story, but it does feel that way. Mike Owsley, the funny thing about your story is your tone it's called The Wharf, and the tone is very sort of it has a poetry to it that I thought was really wild and interesting to read. So introduce yourself and tell us about what the heck is The Wharf. Not like what is it in the story, but what is the story?
Yeah. So I'm Mike. I'm also pretty new to writing in general. I did this last December publish a little short poetry collection called I Forgot to Wrap This that I wrote as like a Christmas present for my partner. So poetry is kind of the thing that got me really into writing. But then I think like story writing and novel writing is more, fiction writing is more my speed now. And I've always been really into Lovecraft. So whenever I saw this call for the submissions, I thought to myself, you know, like if I'm gonna try to write a horror story, I'm definitely going to try to write it more in that sort of delving into the idea of not really understanding the world as you like think you see it. I'm also very scared of going underwater myself. I once actually I was in a pool in Nashville this last summer, and my partner was telling me, you know, I'm a trained lifeguard. It's all good. You know, you'll be fine. Just stick your head underwater. I went underwater. I come up, and instantly I'm like throwing up. I'm like freaking out. Right, very scared of going underwater. Cannot stress this enough. So it fits in really well, because a lot of Lovecraft, you've got this sort of like East Coast vibe, and it felt like a good place to kind of write this story and kind of just explore the idea of, you know, going to this place that's so familiar to you, and then like you notice something new about it, and maybe we've all been there before, but kind of noticing that like more and more like the things that you notice about it are not normal, and you don't really like necessarily entirely like all the things you notice about a place. And then once you realize that, you can't not realize that anymore. You can't consciously not think about that. So I just kind of wanted to play around with that. Having him kind of fall in love with a painter made it helpful to also just like kind of paint the picture of the wharf more clearly to him, so that he could actually see the wharf for what it was. Yeah,
that's wonderful. It's very poetic, and I love that he falls in love with, you know, it involves a painting, and how the whole concept of the painting reflecting things that you didn't notice but now they're taking shape is, you know, I mentioned Creepshow earlier. That's so much like a Tales from the Dark Side concept, or maybe even what was the one that Rod Serling had in the 70s? I'm sorry, Night Gallery. It's a Night Gallery concept, you know, and it's originally a Lovecraftian concept. Okay, so something that I'm really, thank you very much, Mike. Something that I'm curious about is, well, first I should ask if anybody else has questions, like for the group. But if not, I will ask questions, because there's just some things I would love to know. But are there any questions? Julia, did you see any questions out there?
I did have one. Sorry, I don't mean to just
Please.
insert myself. But gosh, wow, I loved hearing all of these different takes on this. And something that I'm very curious about in each of your artistic vision of this is like the idea of mixing love and horror is obviously something that like I feel like everyone at least at some point in their life has had a relationship that kind of feels somewhat like a horror story, and you don't really want to have that.
Yeah.
And it's something definitely that's like a juxtaposition of what you want. So I guess I'm just curious how each of you or whoever wants to answer grappled with the definition of love when attempting and approaching like a horror story about love. And because obviously there's very different like definitions of that throughout each of these short stories.
It's a great question. Thank you.
No one else has something. Mine, because it has a normal like romantic story that is kind of sweet at the beginning. That was something I was very aware of because I didn't want to tell a story where it was just like one of the people is an abuser and like you're in love with someone who is actually hurting you, which is a very valid story, but is something I see told too much. I didn't want either of my characters to read as a monster. As much as my story is a horror story, there is no monster there. And even at the end, they are still equally in love with each other, even if that is to their detriment. And I found that was really fun to explore something that is the most basic, most like common. The characters, even though I don't specify, tend to read like a straight couple and tend to kind of read like they were like a white couple in their like late 20s, early 30s. And to have that be something that then still ends in a horrific thing was really fun for me to play around with, since we don't see just a basic love story be horror-esque that often.
That's interesting. Anybody else?
I'll also jump in. The original, for a long time, probably until like my third edit that I did on The Wharf, I had called it Obsession. Because that was kind of just like the central tenet for me, was I wanted him to fall into this hole and just kind of like keep delving deeper and deeper. And I also have a line in there, I'm trying to remember it. It's a conversation that he has after, I think after their wedding, and in passing, he's just kind of like, this is like the first time I think I've ever had a real conversation with this person. And I kind of wanted to play out like it's possible to like love someone, but also like, I don't know, it's also like if you're so focused on this thing and you're falling so deeply into this like idea, then you can totally miss the actual person who's right there with you until they're finally gone. So
thank you very much. The funny thing is, I thought it was interesting that looking as an editor at all the stories, I would say that this is yet another one, and I wish I had done a chart, a Gantt chart of it. But I would say, you know, we saw a lot of romantic love, but we saw, you know, a huge percentage of like parental love and what I didn't see a lot. This is really interesting to me, considering that this is horror. You know, Alethea and Trisha both started with people who are dealing with jealousy and with unhappiness. But what I didn't see was a lot of obsessive love. And I don't know if it's that we all just have so much experience with obsessive love that we don't even want to contemplate it in horror stories, or you know, in other words, most of the love was sad but relatively healthy, and I just thought that was interesting.
I think there's like an interesting. Oh, sorry, did I cut over someone?
Go ahead.
No, I think there's like this interesting thing where, in a way, horror and love kind of go hand in hand, because I think you can love someone so deeply and still want to stab them in the eyeballs, you know, and especially like, right? And especially when you look at some of these relationships where people, I mean, I think my parents are coming up on their 54th wedding anniversary, you know, and when you've been with someone that long, there's, you can't, I don't know, maybe I'm just the only one who feels that way, but I feel like there is that, it opens up the opportunity for a lot of fun possibilities, I guess. Yeah.
I was just starting to say that in my story, I was playing with, different kinds of love, but also different kinds of horror, because at first it's not clear where some sort of genre element might come in. You think that maybe there's just something earthly going on, because I kind of keep the reader guessing at what exactly is happening, because it won't be spoiling too much to say that it opens up with this mother and son, and things seem a little off. It grows a little bit more and more that it seems like she's not letting the child out of the house. They seem to be very paranoid. The father isn't there, so it kind of implies that there's maybe trouble with that kind of horror, maybe some sort of abuse or something going on. And then pretty soon into the story, there's a line that drops that implies that her child is dead. And so then you really don't know, well, what exactly is happening here.
Yeah.
And so I just had so much fun working with, there actually, you could, now that I think about it, from what you mentioned before, that you actually could think about it as that something obsessive was going on, but in a parental way, and not, usually obsessive love stories are about romantic love.
Yeah.
And so I just had a lot of fun writing the twists and turns and trying to keep the reader guessing about what was going on. Is there a monster? Is there horror? What's happening?
I kind of love the idea of somebody being so obsessed with the notion of their dead loved one, their dead child, that they would do anything to create a new version of that person. And the funny thing is, if that were the creative brief, that could almost be anything. That could be a science fiction story, or it could be a genie's wish story, or a monkey's paw story. It could be anything. And yeah, fun question. Thank you so much, Grace. I'm really curious, and if anybody else has a question, we'll drag it in here. But I'm really curious. How do you decide when you're writing a short story, what form it's going to take? Like I said earlier, some people write stories that are essentially vignettes. There's like one central scene and maybe a beginning scene and an end scene. And others of you are writing stories that are almost like one-act plays. There might be several scenes, but they wrap up. There's so many choices that you can make. And all in the end, what is a short story but something that's between 1,500 and 10,000 words, roughly? So, can you talk about how you come at that challenge when you're first taking after it? Any of you can talk about this, because I'm really curious, because I've written more novels than I remember that I've written, but I still don't really understand exactly how it works, and I would love to hear about your process.
I could just agree with saying that I don't know how it works. I get an idea, and at some point I kind of get a sense of if the idea can be told in a short story or if it's a longer story. But as far as really coming up with a plan for the structure, and for me, it just kind of happens as I go.
Yeah.
For me, I write more novels and short stories like you, Jason. So anytime I'm writing a short story, I find it very difficult to write to the shortness of it. And my scenes start becoming longer and bigger, and there's more description than is necessary. And I've written a lot of 10,000 word short stories. Let me just say that.
Sure.
But the one difference for me is that I definitely do more when I'm approaching a short story. I definitely do less outlining and more just kind of, here's where the story is starting, here's where I'm going toward. Let's see where the characters go in the scenes. Whereas when I'm doing novels, I'm an avid outliner.
The last short story I wrote, I actually outlined it like a novel and broke it down into scenes just like they were chapters. But by the time I wrote it, I actually put little numbers so it has chapters. It's just it's not 10,000, it's like 8,500, but it has chapters. So it's essentially a teeny tiny novel. I don't know. I think this was not the assignment, is what the professor would say. It's like you didn't do what you wrote was a very short novel. Yeah. Anybody else want to attack that? I know that it's almost unanswerable.
I can jump in. I've done about 50 short stories now. So I'm learning, it's always a learning process, but what I start with is a seed, really. And the seed for Witch of Black Mountain was the Black Mountain. So I did a ton of research on Black Mountain in Harlan County, Kentucky, and just kept going and going and going and built the entire world in my head until it happened. The short story that I'm writing right now is for a ghost anthology, and it's the first line that popped in my head. The first line came like fully formed, and it said, "They call me the Ghost Lake Mermaid." And I went, oh crap, this is a first person present tense story, which I've never written in my whole life, and I hate it.
Wow.
But sometimes those are the tiny little pieces that inspire you that you have to run with when it's short stories, because it's almost like poetry. It's that very like essence of the story, and you just have to go with it because that's where the feeling is.
So I want to ask you guys, jump in with if you want to answer questions about that, but I want to add into this. You just mentioned, Alethea, you mentioned first person present tense. I really love first person present tense in novels. I think it can be really groovy. Some people can't stand it. And I mean, like to the level of the other day, a writer on Twitter was saying, I'm not so crazy about first person present tense. And this mob of people came on and they're like, oh, I hate first person present tense. It sucked. And I'm like, how could you have such a strong feeling about a tense? That's the weirdest. It makes no sense to me at all. I enjoy it for its immediacy. But do you guys have any strong feelings about first person, third person, and what have you?
Look, when a story is told, it already happened. So it should be past tense because you're telling a story that already happened, okay?
I hear the words coming out of your mouth, but if I'm at a coffee shop with you and I go, you're not going to believe what just happened. So I go into the laundromat and this guy tries to stab me with a fork. I tell that in first person and in present tense, and it feels you're there with me, right? You put down your coffee cup and you're lit. So that's, I don't know. I think that's the idea anyway. But does anybody else feel strongly about this?
I love first person present tense for the fact that I get to get into the character's train of thoughts. I love having little funky characters that go on wild little tangents in their mind as they're experiencing things, which I didn't get to do too much in this. But it's one of my favorite things to just like be a fully formed character. Whereas whenever you're writing third person, I always feel that there's a slight separation between me and the character.
Wow, that's so well said. That is so much more fun. So well said. Yeah. Has anybody here tried a first person present tense novel?
Yeah, I personally love first person present tense. I mean,
Yeah.
so I'm going to vote on that one. Like, yes, for sure. I could write it forever, especially in young adult and adult. I think it works really well. Actually, my latest middle grade is actually first person present tense also.
Yeah. Excellent. So yes, the last thing I wrote is first person present tense. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to get out of it, at this point. But because what Lewis said is so true, the first person present tense, the person can go, I just looked at this guy and he reminded me of Rock Hudson. And I remember when Rock Hudson and Ronald Reagan didn't talk to one another for 15 years because Reagan was president and then he got sick, blah, blah, blah. And that you can do that stuff if it's just the stream of consciousness. I'm using my hands too much. I'm sorry. You can do that stuff if it's first person present tense, and it's harder to do if it's third person. So I don't know, to me, but wow.
Yeah, Kolchak novels I write in first person, but I write in past tense.
Do you really?
Again, I feel like he is telling the story afterward, That was kind of the shtick of the movies and the series, is that, he's kind of writing down or recording, what happened, but he's doing it in first person.
Well, he had that voice, right, in his tape recorder. So do you, Will, when you're doing that, do you try to remember like Darren McGavin's delivery and stuff like that?
I do as much as I can, try to write in his delivery. How close I get is up to interpretation, but I feel like I can hear him in my head when I'm writing it. So that it helps when that's one of the things I love about tie-in writing is all of my research is watching TV.
That's great. I love it.
But I've mostly written third person limited. And what I really love about that is the ability to jump around from brain to brain and see what other characters are thinking. And also I love writing battle scenes where you're switching from one perspective to another perspective, and you can see bits and pieces of the battle over and over again from different perspectives and what the people were thinking while they were doing certain things. That for me is a lot of fun.
So you said third person limited, meaning you're carrying as though there's a camera riding on the shoulder of this character, and so the only thing that the narrator says is what that character can actually perceive
right
in the moment,
and what that character is thinking.
So it's so funny because you see so many people complain. By the way, advice is so fakta. I mean, you can follow it, not follow it, doesn't matter. But you'll see people say, don't do head hopping, right? How you're in a chapter, and so if you're following the perspective of the judge, then don't suddenly have a perspective of the prisoner in the docket. And the funny thing, unless you do like a chapter break,
right,
or maybe a asterisk break or something. And what's funny is if you go back to Jane Austen or something, she does it all the time. She'll just jump from one narrative. Okay, Alethea says here, she goes, don't do head hopping badly. Do you want to say more about that?
It's just I majored in chemistry, so I never took many formal writing courses, but the couple that I did, I heard rules like this: don't write humor, don't write poetry, especially if you write children's books, don't write poetry. And two things it turns out I'm really good at are humor and poetry, but I tried to stay away from them for a really long time. And then I took a poetry class with Carol Boston Weatherford, and I said, what is the deal with everybody saying don't write poetry when a lot of the books you read, and children's books specifically, are poetry? And she said, just don't write bad poetry. And I was like, oh, so like all of these rules, don't head hop, don't write in first person, don't do this, don't do it badly. So try, work on your tools, get really good at it, and then you can do whatever the heck you want. But I think that's the delineation that people seem to miss, is that you can do it, just, try not to make it so glaring that it throws the reader out of the story.
I actually want to ask you, and I know that we're getting low on time, but I really want to ask, what other rules have you guys heard that you find you either ignore or you just find to be a pain in the ass? I'd love to hear your perspectives on writing rules. Anybody who wants to volunteer.
This one is super minor for me, but like starting sentences with like but and growing always told not to do that, and I'm like all the time I'm like writing a sentence, and then I'm like, and then I start the sentence with but, and I'm like, I shouldn't do that. Then I'm like, no, but I like the way it sounds. So I'm
absolutely gonna. It's all about, does it sound okay? To me, if anybody's formulating an answer, I just want to say the one that drives me crazy is people say, what is it? Show don't tell, right? Show don't tell. And I just taught a course for the Horror University a few weeks ago about writing your novel and structuring it and stuff like that. And people want to know about show don't tell. And as far as I can work out, having again written more novels than I remember, I don't know what that rule means. I as far as I can tell, it just means don't be boring. Don't, because the fact is, a good example. If I say they walked across the parking lot after leaving their car in a useful place and finally got to the counter, and the first counter was trouble, but the second one is where it really got interesting. And then you get into the scene with the second counter person. You told, and now you're going to show. You told the stuff that would be boring, and you skip it, and I hate that rule. It means almost nothing as far as I can work out, other than what Alethea said, which is don't be bad.
Yeah. Well, it's to get any meaning out of it, you have to think of it more as don't tell what you should show,
right?
And don't show what you should tell.
Don't show what you should tell. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Because there are definitely parts of narrative structure that you don't need to show them in grand detail. You just need to get through them, A, B, C, D, and then you get to the meat. And when you get to the meat, you don't want to just say, oh, he was so scared. You want to show the reader how scared he was. He was trembling, he was sweating, he was sick to his stomach or whatever.
Yeah, well said.
And so it's about picking the things that you really need to show. But when you give these short little rules, don't do this, don't do that, they're almost always nonsense, and you can always find so many exceptions to the rule that it does become meaningless. Especially all those grammar things, like starting a sentence with and. Almost every grammar rule you hear someone harp about is not true.
Look, I understand that it's very important to know these rules. It's very important to know grammar. It's very important to know how to spell. But yeah, once you're doing fiction, and you kind of have to start trying to stretch and do all that. By the way, I don't know. Yeah, go ahead, please, Tricia.
Oh, I just love to throw in a pitch for my favorite writing book in the world, which is the Emotion Thesaurus. And I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's honestly like for every emotion, like scared, you look up scared and it gives you all the actions, how you can show somebody being scared or happy. And it gives, and so like, I remember for my book Solstice, as an interesting writing exercise, when I wrote that book, I had that book at my writing desk and literally tried to use it all the time. Just to I tried to eliminate all dialogue tags and show actions and show how people were feeling instead. And it was honestly a great writing experience, And so it's called the Emotion Thesaurus. They have a whole bunch of different books out, the authors do, but the very basic one is honestly the best investment you'll ever make.
That's a wonderful, thank you so much. I must have that now. That is that I would get a lot out of it. As Julie and I have talked about a lot, there are sometimes, like I know that and I know a lot of other people sometimes speak as though we have a much smaller box of crayons than other people, and so my understanding of emotions can be fairly basic compared to Julia, who's here, and we're coming up on our 28th anniversary, but we still don't, we still speak in entirely different idioms and 29, sorry. And and by the way, Julia and I met in high school. I just wanted to mention. So everybody's stuck around for a long time. Insher and I met in 5th grade. Julia and I met in high school. Gosh, okay. Other questions, because I know we're coming up to the top of the hour. But did I miss anything? And if not, anybody who wants to throw anything out, you are completely welcome to. But if not, I just want to say thank you. I read through this book again about a couple of weeks ago just to do a final line edit, right? And I really just thought that the level of quality in these stories, they went together really well, and I think it's one of the best collections we've ever done. And I was really honored to have a chance to work with all of you. I always feel very humbled that I get a chance to work with you, and I know that we're a small independent press, so we do the best we can, and it means so much to me to have everybody there. So thank you so much, and please reach out anytime, and we'll talk. And thank you for all your kind comments in the chat room as well. So, all right, everybody, have a wonderful evening. Those of you listening, Love Gone Wrong is now available, so go get it. And I'll put this up on YouTube, and I'll send you guys the links. Bye, everybody.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks, Jason.